Thank you, Chairman of Council. I'd like to nominate Councillor Joel Williams to be Chairman of this committee or board.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much for that. I'll do introductions in just a moment, but before we do that, could we do the second part of agenda item 1, which is nominations for Vice Chairman of the Health and Wellbeing Board for the ensuing year. Councillor Francis.
I'd like to nominate Paul Charnock.
Do we have a seconder for that? I know Paul and I have had a conversation. I don't know if you just want to either make some comments around accepting the nomination or deferring slightly, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit flattered, actually. I've thought about it because the Chair did have a brief word with me very, very recently, and I've thought about it. Yes, I'm flattered. I do need to know some more detail about expectations, but very importantly, it's the sort of thing I would have to take back to my board. Whilst over in the past we've had members of the council, councillors, as part of our group, I would have to discuss it with our group, with my board members to clarify that that there are no difficulties involved in, mainly because Health Watch is fights sometimes, but is to be independent of all bodies, because we may be critical or as helpful as we can in some situations, but we may be critical. So that's the only thing I could say. There is a board meeting next week where I would raise this issue if you wish me to do that and take matters further. Otherwise, I apologise, I can't give an answer today.
Would you be then happy to be classed as our preferred nominee for the role, subject to satisfying some of those queries you have? And then pending the next meeting, we can either ratify or review.
Yes, but unlike the current leadership of the political party, everyone else, obviously, there will be other people who may be wishing to take that position. I don't see that as a problem.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, if I may, I've got a suggestion, because you wouldn't be able to ratify a new vice chairman then, or any vice chairman, until the next meeting of this board, which will be quite some months away. So perhaps the best thing is to appoint now, pending approval from the Health and Wellbeing Board, and if so, you'll go forward and become our vice chairman immediately. And then if not, you would just not do that role, and a new vice chairman will be appointed at the next meeting of this board, as a suggestion.
Something you doesn't like your...
Would it be better to think about another nomination? And I would suggest, I am a member of this board myself, I would suggest Steve, because we have had Felicity Owen as our vice chairman for some time, and I think, and it just also symbolises the really strong working relationship we have with our public health colleagues.
I mean, I'm happy in terms of, I think the position, Aisling, of a Director of Public Health being the Vice Chair will be absolutely fine, rather than us a named person, given the interim nature of my current post. But as a principal and as Director of Public Health, that's what in the past we could happy with that. But I guess it would be second choice. First reserve, shall we say.
So why don't we go with Andy's suggestion, if Paul, you're happy with that, Paul is interim vice chair, subject to agreement from the Health Watch board, and then if that doesn't happen, Steve can take your place.
Cool.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Would you like to join us at the top table, Paul, or are you happy to sit where you are?
I'm happy.
Okay, there's no chair here, so rather than going with all the fuss and kerfuffle, then let's stay where we are. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Please, could we do, before declarations of interest, just introductions of who we are and perhaps who we represent this morning? Starting perhaps with Ashley.
Who I am.
Who you are and where you come from.
Hello, I'm Ashley Khan and I'm the Director of Children and Adult Services for the Council of the Isles of Scilly. Sorry, Fran, well spotted.
Paul Charnock, Chair, Health Watch, Isles of Scilly.
I'm Steve Brown, the Interim Service Director for Wellbeing and Public Health.
Hi, Rachel Wigglesworth. I'm Assistant Director of Public Health at the Public Health Team at Cornwall Council.
Hi, Dan Marcus. I'm the lead member for adults.
I'm Anthony Ball, Public Health Practitioner, Cornwall Council.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Cohn. I'm Advanced Analyst for Public Health Cornwall. And also
Fran Grottick, Councillor of the Isles of Scilly and Vice Chairman of Council.
Robert Francis, Chairman of the Council of the Isles of Scilly.
Bob Dawson, Officer for Policy and Scrutiny, supporting the committee.
And Joel Williams, I'm also lead member for Children and Young People on the Council of the Isles of Scilly. And thank you all for coming, especially those who've made the effort to fly over this morning. I know Health and Wellbeing Board generally is associated with foggy days, so it's great to see you. I know we've got a workshop after this meeting where other individuals will be joining us, so I hope we get some productive conversations out of today's meetings. Do we have any declarations of interest as agenda item 2, please? Councillor Grottick.
Chairman, I feel I should mention that I represent the Council on the Cornwall Partnership NHS Trust.
Thank you very much. Any others? Agenda item 3 is to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting we had in November. Does anybody have any comments regarding factual accuracy? I did notice as well on the bottom of page 2, we talked about having a matters arising section. So if, I'm happy that if anyone does have any queries relating to matters arising, because we said in the minutes we would do, although it's not a formal agenda item today. In that case, are we happy to accept the minutes as a true and accurate record? Thank you very much, Councillor Francis. I don't have any urgent items. As a matter of housekeeping, I think we're saying that items 7 and 8 have been merged into one for our agenda this morning. I think that's correct, isn't it, Bob?
That's great.
Which brings us on to part 1, reports requiring a decision. And I'd like to hand over to Steve for his Director of Public Health annual report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The report's been circulated, and I'll take the assumption that people have at least looked through it, if not necessarily read it in full detail. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll give a brief overview and then come on to some of the recommendations at the end, if that's okay. I'm happy to answer questions at the end as well. And luckily, I have most of my team here today, and if I can't answer it, hopefully they will be able to. So this is 2018 annual report. You obviously see it focuses on a really, really important topic, which is about children and young people and the best start in life. It shines a spotlight on children living in poverty, which in the 21st century in Cornwall and Isles of Scilly, some people might think it shouldn't be a huge issue or concern, but we do know, 16% of children in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly actually do live in poverty. And when you look at the cost of housing as well, you're talking, 30,000. So it's not an insignificant number of children. And I think the board will probably join me in wanting to reduce that figure as a key action over the coming years. In terms of tackling poverty and obviously children and families living in poverty, we know there is a number of indicators, a number of issues which surround that, worklessness, debt, about how we go around strengthening families, tackling education, and obviously poor health as a result of living in poverty. And this report focuses on the poor health bit of it. So it doesn't by any stretch cover all the aspects to it. So when we're thinking about how we go about tackling poverty, things like worklessness, employment, education are all key parts of it. But this is specifically focusing on poor health. In terms of the how the report's been constructed, we've kind of taken if you like, a life course approach. So you'll see it talks about pregnancies, early years, and goes on to children, young people as well. And in each element, we focus on key issues in relating to the impact of children living in poverty. It shines a spotlight. I know Aisling and I've talked about this previously around adverse childhood experiences and the impact that has not only on the individual children and their families, but also the rest of their lives in adulthood as well. In terms of the other key element is around reducing inequalities associated with this as well. And when you think about poor health and poor health outcomes, that starts in kind of preconception phase. So in terms of the support, information and advice we can give to mums to be and families to be is really, really important. And that focuses within the report as well. It also tackles things like the importance of nutrition and breastfeeding as an example. So the report goes through that kind of life course approach. And it culminates really in a set of recommendations which are on page 8 of the report. There's 9 recommendations on the report. When we discussed this at the Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board, the Health and Wellbeing Board were really keen, as I'm sure this board will be, to not just at the recommendations, stand as recommendations and wanting to see actions associated with that. So one of the action points which came out of that board was to take the recommendations and have a discussion at the One Vision executive to say, if these are the recommendations which we feel are really important, you need to be coming back to us and saying what those actions are. So I've taken an action in terms of the One Vision executive to kind of look at what are the actions, not just the recommendation, what are the actions associated with those recommendations, who's going to be doing what, over what timescale. That will be shared at the next executive board, and I'm happy to share that here if this board are in agreement that those recommendations are the recommendations we need to be shining a spotlight on. I'm just conscious that what we didn't want this report to be is a report which sits on the shelf. It needs to be actioned, and I think it's a really powerful statement for the One Vision Partnership to take responsibility, not for delivering every action around here, but take responsibility for the oversight of that, reporting back to the 2 boards if the board feel that's an appropriate route forward for here. I'm going to pause there and take the opportunity, Chair, for answer any questions. So I haven't gone into too much detail on the premise that you've probably flipped through the report anyway, but happy to try and answer any questions if you feel you have any particularly.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful you sort of came on to the subject of actions then. For me, it was a report that was a very, very comprehensive analysis of the evidence, but I wasn't necessarily picking up the what we can actually do. It's clear that what is happening today in some parts of Cornwall and potentially on Scilly isn't good enough. It's not satisfactory, which is why we've got this data. But it's what are we going to be doing from now on in to be able to make sure that in 2 or 3 years' time the situation is improving. And I sit on the One Vision Partnership, so it'll be good to have that sort of link there. But I don't know if other colleagues have got any comments they'd like to make at this stage.
Chair, could we ask 1 or 2 questions about including the body of the report? Just want to give me because I've got the 5 and I have read it and I've read it twice, but my memory doesn't work as well as it used to do. There's one section in particular that may I first say that thank you for clarifying that there's going to be a who, what with possibly some targets to come, because that's the one thing I thought in certain areas seem to be missing. The problems are well outlined, and I congratulate you for that. But there's a section on overweight children who are overweight, and I can't find it now. I've earmarked it and I can't find it. But the thing that concerns me on that section, and obviously there are other sections as well, is that the little map shows that the Isles of Scilly is in dark blue, if people can see it. Can you see what page it is? Right.
Page 60.
60. Oh, I did read it wrong. Yes, there's shown, yeah, the map showing proportion of children below, no. That's not it. This is the one concerning children who are overweight.
60, the graph there is for people who are in excess weight, overweight or obese. So it might be top of page 60.
Right.
Is that the diagram? Yes, you have marked it.
No, I can't find it now. But the suggestion was that the Isles of Scilly had a very high rate of it's poverty. Sorry, poverty. Because I had a question about the overweight section as well. It's the poverty section, children living in poverty, and the Isles of Scilly is something like 30%. Is it? Certainly, it's in dark colour compared to the rest of Cornwall, as far as I can see. And I just wonder, how is that information collated concerning Scilly and Cornwall, and what sort of things constitute Scilly to be sort of an outlier compared to the rest of Cornwall? Apologies, I can't just drop on it straight away. Page 16. Poverty and yes, okay, page 15. If you look at the map of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, we're 34 to 35. It's not printed too well, but 31 to 35, I think, percent, is it? And we're rather dark compared to the rest of Cornwall.
Bex may be able to cast more light on that. I guess two observations for me. One is around your note on the key. The words after housing costs are taken into consideration. So that might be one of the issues. And I guess whether it's the numbers as well, Bex. I don't know whether it's the low numbers might. So if there's high housing costs, low number of people, those two together might push it onto. In this case, it's kind of dark blue, if that's right. But I don't know, Bex, have you got anything?
The actual indicator is made up of a number of actual data sets. So they'll be taking into account income, taking into account seasonality, the full-time, part-time working of parents. There's a variety of things. I'm quite happy to share with you after the meeting the indicators that go into that particular subset. And what I'll be talking to you about later on in the workshop is that unfortunately all of these measures, particularly around deprivation and poverty, so this one and the instance of multiple deprivation, have their flaws when it relates to the urban community. So some of those indicators are very much urban centric. We have issues with them in the same regards in some of our more rural areas of Cornwall, where we know there are pockets of deprivation, but they're not identified. Here, it seems to have worked the other way with this, but if you look at the indices of multiple deprivation, which is another way of measuring deprivation and poverty, the Isles of Scilly features, particularly well in that regard. They're not in the top 20% of most deprived areas in England, so it will be to do with the indicator set in this particular.
Okay. I just thought it was a bit of an outlier in a way, because also if you looked at issues about quality of life, then it could be argued by many, and the availability and accessibility of services, social care and health services, there are lots of pluses, and it just seems, well, and we've got children who are living in a great deal of poverty compared to the rest of Cornwall. That was just my question, Mark. Thank you for your response.
But if it'd be helpful, then I'm quite happy to sort of draft a little piece that fully explains that to the board in terms of why that is.
I think this is just indicates that data can never tell the whole story for Scilly. So in terms of working in children's services, we do not see poverty as described in lots of this report, and thankfully, and I think that's part of our deliberate strategy to invest in early help. And so we continue to have a children's centre. We continue to invest in a universal offer for 2-year-olds to access nursery education, 3 and 4-year-olds. We've got a healthy school who are doing the daily mile. So there's quite a lot of visibility of young people to services where we can pick up any of those warning signs. I'm not saying that lives are without problems here, and of course that's not true, but we are able to identify them and offer support at the earliest possible stage. But we aren't picking up poverty in some of the kind of extreme ways that we are hearing about in Cornwall. We haven't yet needed to develop a food bank, etc., etc. We've got very low numbers of children on pupil premium. So in terms of our own indicators, we're not seeing poverty in that way, but we can't relax about that. There are certainly issues around access to affordable housing and transport, and those issues are being addressed through a kind of variety of projects, that both led by the local authority and other partners. I mean, I think that's what the picture looks like for me. And you know, if anyone's got any other observations about how they think children's lives are on Scilly, that would be great. But the data doesn't always help. You know, like it's like obesity data. If you've got a small peer group of 15 children and one is obese, that will totally affect how that will look in that 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be looking at things like your health visitor data, for example. You know, it could literally be one missed appointment, and that will throw your entire data set out for that quarter. I think the one aspect that I would, and you know, you'll be talking about it later, but the fuel poverty aspect does feature very heavily for the Isles of Scilly, and that does affect a lot of your data around some of these issues.
In your report, Steve, in section 9, you talk about the 3 different options, and one of them is to identify specific action. So I think what we could potentially be saying from the roundtable conversation we just had was our actions could look different to what goes on in the state of that in Canada.
I absolutely think you're right, Chair. I think so in the recommendations and subsequently some of those key actions, the operability, so the delivery of those actions will be very different depending on where we are. And I think certainly for me, that's about, so recognising there's some universal kind of actions to take place at a high level. A great deal of them, those actions would take place in a place-based, and you know, the delivery in North Cornwall will be different to the delivery here on the Scilly Isles. Yeah. Okay.
I went for work with Bob a few weeks ago, which you did in Camden, and was shocked by some of the stories around your health we were talking about. Children getting to school age couldn't even want a toothbrush. It just seemed like a shocking way to be starting your life. Just as you said, you go to place an hour or so from where we sat today. It just didn't resonate with what I see on Scilly, but obviously it's taking place.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask about the Daily Mile that was mentioned just now by Aisling? Because in the minutes last time it said that although the school were doing, I think it was Shake and Wake or Wake and Shake, they were going to be encouraged to take up the Daily Mile challenge. Do we actually know if that's actually happened, please? That's great.
But I think Ashley is absolutely right. We can't rest on our laurels. It's great that we are investing in the
Sorry, Chair, can I just remind you to use your microphone? Thank you.
There are all sorts of initiatives which I think we as a council should be proud of, and as a community we should be proud of, but we should never take them for granted. And we should always be aware, looking at the impact and outcomes of some of the investments we make to make sure that they are reducing poverty and supporting those who need it most. So are we moving towards Councillor Martin?
Sorry, yeah, just want to say a couple of things relatively new to this. So it's informative, quite easy to read. The maps, the keys are kind of unreadable, so we could sort it out for next time, both digitally and on paper. So that's one of the things that would be really good to see. And I would totally support the oversight coming back to Health and Wellbeing Board, because that's the only way you're going to see whether your recommendations are actually making any effect or not. And that's it. Thank you.
So I was just going to sort of summarise by saying we've got the One Vision partnership as one vehicle for looking potentially at the more strategic aspect of the issue. We've also got our local Children's Trust Board, which might then be a vehicle for picking up on some of these specific island issues. So are we moving towards looking at option 9.3 as a sort of recommendation that we support the recommendations in the annual report and then look to identify specific island-focused local actions, but also learning messages from the bigger picture on the mainland on how we try and address some of the concerns we may have? Bob.
Sorry, is that something you want to include in the recommendations, Chairman?
I would have, yeah, I'm just trying to sort of marry the options available to us with the recommendation in box 1, if that makes sense to others.
Yep, we can adapt the recommendation. I think it's recommendation 2, is it, to reflect that?
Yeah,
Chairman.
fine.
Thank you.
And I certainly take your point, Steve. We don't want this to sit on the shelf. We want to be as proactive and as engaged in the process as we possibly can. Does that move us on to agenda item, Anthony's agenda item? Yes, we don't tend to do formal. Do we need a formal proposer and seconder for recommendations? For the records?
You should do.
Okay, we shall do that. Can I have a proposer and seconder for recommendations with that option, please?
So the recommendations as written here, or?
But also encapsulating option 3 on page 5 of the report.
Page 5.
Yes, to reflect that the actions taken will be island focused.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6 is fuel poverty. Over to you, Anthony, please.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting us here today. And this invite came from Councillor Williams when we were doing some of the events for this in March this year. But just to highlight here that Winter Wellbeing has been running since about 2011. And through all that work, we've always identified the needs for the Isles of Scilly, but the money has not always come with that need. Whereas under this project, unfortunately snappily titled Warm Home Discount Industry Initiative, it's basically a £300,000 programme over 18 months to tackle some of the softer measures for tackling fuel poverty. And I'll sort of run through some of those measures that are covered initially. It was pretty much born out of sort of Scilly Works, which was a previous scheme the Health and Wellbeing Board and Children's Services endorsed, and has continued running from that initial basis with Inclusion Cornwall. And it's having that consistency of approach, so we don't just parachute in, parachute out. We've always kept it at the fore to say we've got to tackle fuel poverty, particularly as it runs at about 15% on the Isles of Scilly, way above the national average, partly because of the island issues, but also partly because it's just not really dealt with in terms of national policy, in terms of how to tackle fuel poverty in a rural area, let alone an island community. And the other point to bear in mind is the English government does not invest any money into tackling fuel poverty. So this money has all come from the private sector, but money that you and I all pay as our energy bills are known as the energy company obligation money. So moving on, and this will run till February 2020, this programme. So moving on to page 106 of the agenda, that really just sort of runs through the bit and says what sort of things we would cover under this sort of programme. So as I said, sort of softer measures, so things like energy advice, energy debts. How do we make it cheaper to actually pay for the energy you've already got? And things happen there like people will traditionally keep going with the same energy supplier. And if they've got a health condition, it gives them anxiety, gives them worries. How do I keep my home warm? Certainly on the first visit in March this year, we saved 2 customers £800 overnight. If you're on a low income, that's a lot of money that you can actually not give to an energy company, but give to yourself and make yourself feel a lot healthier and a lot happier. Also, it's about putting measures in there like loft insulation for the Isles of Scilly that we've known all the way along, that just does not happen here. Technically, everybody's eligible, but it just doesn't happen if one company has to come and install one loft. It's just never going to happen. So from the first visit in March, we identified 18 customers that needed loft insulation. And we're working with your housing colleagues, Rachel Guy, to identify a local contractor, to get all the loft insulation here, to then go and install that. So we deal with that issue then. And there's other things like draft excluders, LED lights, some sort of small upgrades, small repairs, all those sort of things that never normally get tackled, but under this program can be tackled, and anything else we find really. So, and currently we're using the Cornwall way of sort of assessing fuel poverty to sort of see how we check if someone's got a health condition and whether they're in fuel poverty or not. Whereas I know at a future meeting on the 18th of June, you're going to be determining what your own way of assessing fuel poverty could be. So that will feed into that program as and when that is approved by that particular committee. Okay, so moving on. So there's just a poster on page 107 of your report, just saying what the first visit was in March this year, and some of the events that took place that were hosted by with Community Energy Plus and Cornwall Rural Community Council and Inclusion Cornwall, and with the Council Isles of Scilly. And then as part of the bid, we wrote in for 2 further visits. So there's another one coming up next week with Cornwall Rural Community Charity coming over to do much what's written here. And then there'll be a further one in October as well. So then that's costed to actually pay for that visit, which is good. And then on page 108, we highlight, again, sort of some of the measures we can cover. So these are some of the outcomes we've got to look at. And then on page 109, just a breakdown of the budget for a year, for the year, on how much is there to actually pay for the repairs and which particular fields. And we can move money around that as well, but that just gives the general picture. And those figures are for Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. And obviously we can move money around the budget to pay for wherever we need to. And then page 110 highlights where the visits will take place and when. And then Inclusion Cornwall are managing this programme on our behalf. So if you've got any of your constituents or anyone you want to flag up to us, or any particular community, then let us know and we can factor that into future visits. But as I said at the start, that's a 300k service or £300,000 service. Money that never would have come to Cornwall Isles of Scilly. Us two, are the first 2 local authorities in the country to actually get this money for our local communities. So it tends to be top sliced and goes to sort of energy companies to sort of offer services. So we're the first ones that are directed straight to our communities. And based on the way where the money comes from, we will have to bid again in July for next financial year and possibly the financial year after that. So by proving that we've done it up until the end of March, just gone, then hopefully that money will follow through for future years as well. So we want to work with you, we want to demonstrate it works, but also we want to get more customers to come through to make sure we can try and reduce that fuel poverty figure of 15% on the Isles of Scilly and get it down, which then factors into the public health report of actually tackling that inequality that is totally and utterly preventable. But happy to take any questions.
Councillor Grosick.
Thank you, Chair. That's really encouraging because it's been so frustrating over recent years to have all these leaflets be popped through your door saying, you can have, if you're over 60, you can have X, Y, and Z. And then when people rang up, they found they couldn't because of where they lived. And obviously it's not rocket science. If you live in a cold home, you're far more likely to suffer chest complaints and a range of other ailments. So I think this is really positive. The council realised that we've got to do something with our own housing stock, and we're moving forward in that direction. And hopefully that will be an exemplar, and we can then encourage, private landlords and work with the duchy. Part of the problem, of course, is the fact that a lot of our cottages, especially on the off islands, are granite and incredibly difficult to insulate properly. But I really hope we can move forward on this one. So well done, and thank you very much.
Could I just check about the small print in terms of eligibility? Is it things like the insulation, is it open to anyone regardless of whether it's a private house, social housing?
Yeah, it's tenure blind. I mean, the way the system works at the moment, so any tenure, anyone can be eligible. But from our point of view, they must have a health condition.
Okay.
But that can be quite broad, because if it's like we've just been talking about, best start in life, if it's a child that may be having lots of coughs, illnesses, they may not technically be ill yet, but we want to stop that now to make sure that doesn't affect their whole life course. So we are quite broad with our interpretation. Certainly under our main programme, we have an independent panel as well that checks some of our approvals, because sometimes you may have people that are over our limits, but actually there might be, say, a disabled child in there. So they might have a high income, but they might be spending a fortune on changing the bedding, washing the bedding, keeping, you know. So there's a lot more higher costs that may be involved that aren't always picked out by just having one straightforward way of doing it. And the idea behind all this is to make sure as many people are eligible. It's that way around, rather than, say, being a gatekeeper to say, oh, you can't have it because you're not on the right benefit or the right income. We want to make as many people eligible to tackle the problem head on, really, rather than create another problem.
You mentioned you're sort of linked in with the council's housing team, which is great. And I'm assuming you're also connections with community venture and groups like that who are also working on similar topics.
Yes, we met with them last year with your housing service and Nicola Stinson. So is that planning, economic growth, Nicola? Can't remember which directorate they're in, but yeah, so we're linking all that, and we met with the community ventures as well. And obviously, yes, they've put a lot of energy efficiency works in, but we need to do more with the energy efficiency works that Councillor Gocke has just mentioned in terms of the council's housing stock, to make sure we add more value to that investment. Because obviously, ultimately, we want the fuel poverty to be reduced, energy efficiency to be increased, and less income be spent on that to make sure it is sustainable in the long run, and for people's health conditions to be improved because of it.
Councillor Marcus.
It sounds like a great project. What's the take-up like, both on Scilly and for the whole area?
Well, in terms of the basic figures, I think we have to do 600 households between now and, or between when we started, so January this year through to February 2020.
How's that going?
That's going pretty well. We've done 200 so far in the programme we just sort of done up until the end of March. At the moment, we're just sort of on hold, so we're collecting people, but because the money hasn't come from our funder, we won't actually issue the works to go ahead currently for this financial year, but there's a lot in the queue waiting to go. So I think we have no issue of getting that many households, unfortunately. On Scilly, I think I don't have the exact figures, but certainly I think from the first couple of visits, we had 18 identified for loft installation. I'm pretty sure about 40 or 50 were identified for help on the first visit. So we would expect something like, we might help 100.
And is that private and local authority as well, housing association?
Yeah. That's any tenure.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, regardless of which tenure you live in, we're looking at it from a health condition, and that doesn't pick you out by health condition, by tenure.
Paul?
Yes, thank you for that, for your report, and thank you to Councillor Grottick for raising or referring to the off islands. As Health Watch, and I think sometimes it's experienced by other organisations, it can be quite challenging sometimes to reach people on the off islands. And there has been a comment made to me one or two times that most things are sort of St Mary's centric, which I can appreciate, and it goes with either living on St Mary's or on the off islands, where there's a small number of people to engage with. But we have our issues about engaging with the off islands, and I just wonder, how do you have any plans to make any various approaches? I noticed the days that some of the work is done covers a Thursday, and I would just suggest that maybe that would be at the back of your mind as well in the future, that activities be on Thursday, because that's mainly the main shopping day, or off-island day as it's called. But has it posed any problems for your good selves?
We've learned from that in the past. So, for example, on the visits in March, then one of the officers went to St Agnes, linked with the off-island officer there, and so worked with the off-islands there and met quite a few people. So a lot of visits are planned in beforehand. I think as well they did a session on St Martin's using the community centre there last time, and then certainly the visit next week, that's planned in for the Monday, I think Monday the 10th of June. There'll be a community session on St Martin's, and they're also planning on going to Briar, because I think we've missed out Briar before, and Tresco. So we're trying to sort of cover all islands on several visits, as well as doing St Mary's as well on the Thursday, when traditionally more people will be on St Mary's from the off islands as well as St Mary's. So we are trying to do all islands and factor that in.
Just to come back to Joel's earlier point about linking into other organisations, obviously, our public health nursing team, our children's services team and adult social care team have promoted previous schemes and signpost people to it. So we're also able to find those hard to reach individuals who really might not be seeing posters around town. So we use our own local intelligence. We've gone through the phone book, we've rung people up. So we are, all working together to make this happen. It's a great, great project. We love working with Anthony.
Mm. And I'd hope the landlords would know with their EPCs about their own individual buildings. So I'm looking at the big landlords here, Duchy and housing associations.
Anthony's spoken to the Duchy as well.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to know what the cumulative figure over the past few years is that you've saved island households. I'm sure some of the electricity companies, it's a tiny fraction of their percentage income, but as you say, for some households, it's going to be very, very significant. So it tells a great story. But I'm very pleased that for years we've spoken about keeping the heat in. It's okay giving people cheaper heat potentially through solar panels, but if the heat is just going straight out of uninsulated roofs and walls, then it's not having much of a benefit. But it's great that we've turned the corner on that. Any further comments, or can we get a proposer and seconder to note the recommendation of the contents of the attached report? Councillor Grottick.
Happy to propose that we note the attached uptake.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, agenda item 7 and 8 have been merged into one. It's got your name on it, Bob. I don't know if are you kicking off on that one?
I will hand directly over to Rebecca Cohen for this. Thank you very much. Yep. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think this report really is just to provide you all with an update on the process and various activities that have been undertaken in regards to the development of the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. Our proposals around a population health needs summary and the emerging sort of health and wellbeing strategy. And obviously, we don't want to do overkill, seeing as we've got a workshop straight after this meeting. But I'll just take you through some of those things so that you're aware of them. We last reported to the board in November. And so that is where the board sort of ratified bringing the joint needs assessment together so that we then bring some of the intelligence products about the Isles of Scilly in line with those that are developed for Cornwall. We have developed a set of topic summaries along the lines of those that were agreed at the meeting. And they are now informing the next phase, which is having to be pushed forward in line with the health and wellbeing strategy, which is the development of the population health needs summary document. So effectively, this is bringing all the intelligence that we've got through the joint strategic needs assessment into one sort of master summary document. It's a very high level strategic document giving a sort of a summary of the key population health needs across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And in Appendix 1, we've listed what that will look like in terms of the sort of the structure of the report. You'll note that we've taken sort of in section 6 what we're calling sort of a lens view of population health. So we'll be looking at what are the sort of key conditions, what are population cohorts and the key inequalities, prevention, systems and the wider determinants aspects. So that will be an overview for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. What we are mindful of and obviously we've been reminded of about the issues with data and the Isles of Scilly. There will be a specific health by area focus. So there will be a specific element of this report that focuses on the Isles of Scilly, pulling from those topic papers. So I would just like to assure you that you will see that well in advance. It will be circulated for comments, etc., etc. So it will be tested with you before it is publicly circulated. to ensure that you're confident in what that's saying.
So just for
always-
clarity, Scilly would be seen as a definite local area within itself rather than amalgamated with.
For STP purposes, the geographies of Cornwall have been split into integrated care areas. So there'll be 3 areas. So east and north, mid and west. And then Isles of Scilly is being treated in its own right alongside those 3 areas. So we will be creating profiles on those 3 areas and the Isles of Scilly, so that you're able to clearly identify the Isles of Scilly in that process, and the Isles of Scilly is not lost in the the overarching approach. So the plan is for that to be in draft for July. So we will then be circulating that and getting the feedback around that. That is obviously then informing the health and wellbeing strategy. So we've done quite a lot of work around this already. We've looked at the information from the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, and we've put that through a prioritisation matrix to help us inform some of the headline indicators for the health and wellbeing strategy, so the starts of the development, and we'll be talking about that later. And we've recently held a workshop similar to the one that we'll be holding later on the mainland on the 15th of May. And you'll see in Appendix 2 some of the feedback to the initial sort of draft that we put out there. I think we are very much in a testing phase around where these priorities are. And obviously the headlines of the health and wellbeing strategy, this is sort of like plan on a page approach that we'll be testing with you. We need to make sure that that is as applicable on the islands as it is on the mainland. The plan again is with the health and wellbeing strategy is that there will be an overarching health and wellbeing strategy, but from that there will flow delivery plans. So similar to the approach that you were talking about with the Director of Public Health report, that each area will take those overarching framework, but actually have their own sets of priorities and actions that they want to take in response to those key issues. So that is kind of a phase 2. We'll be developing the overarching plan, and the plan is that will come back to you October, November time for ratification. It will come back to you beforehand, before that point, and you will be able to comment and inform that. Hopefully it will be signed off, and the reason that we're talking about the autumn is that is in line with the long-term plan, the NHS long-term plan submission date, which is in autumn. And in typical NHS fashion, there is no confirmed date as to when that is, but it makes sense for all these things to try and align, and that the same evidence is used to inform that will inform the health and wellbeing strategy as well. So as I said, that's kind of a broad outline of the timescales that we're working to. The delivery plans will start from that point onwards, so November onwards. That is when we will be back working with you to identify, okay, what are the key things that are important on the islands in terms of tackling these specific issues. What do you want to focus on, and based on the evidence, where can we go from there? So I hope that's acceptable, but obviously if there's any questions, then please feel free to come back to me.
Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'd just like to thank you for that report, and especially giving the islands the opportunity to have, the focus here as well as everywhere else, rather than being consumed in the mass. So it's much appreciated. Thank you, and I'm sure we'll work well. Thank you.
Councillor Marcus.
In Appendix 1, in the political landscape, do we need to have a mention in there? We're not mentioned by initial in that one.
An oversight. Apologies.
That's
Yes,
right.
it will be. So it'll be the same. Yeah, we will bring in sort of, because obviously you've recently agreed your council plan or your overarching plans, etc. And so we'll make sure that those are identified as well. I'm sorry, that was a.
That's all right. No, that's fine. And do the dates all match up with our health and wellbeing board? You're talking about autumn, and the next meeting's not till November. Is that right?
Yes, we've been discussed this with the chairman, I think, as well, in terms of how we've got the council calendar as provisional dates, but again, the board has control of its kind of forward plan of meetings and can be changed to meet the requirements as needed. The next meeting will be 5th of September currently, and the next one after that be 5th of December.
Yeah, far away.
I mean, I think the aim is that we will bring a very clear draft to you in September so that we can have those discussions again. I believe previously you were given some delegated authority to act on behalf, and obviously there's an open invite for you to attend the Health and Wellbeing Board over in Cornwall as well when that discussions at the board, or for anyone to dial in us if we can set the technology to work, so that we make sure that the two boards are in alignment as far as possible with signing these things off.
My memory confuses me sometimes, but I think it was a conversation with Steve at the workshop where we were sort of talking about focus and whether it's best to almost identify 2 or 3 or 4 very specific things which as a community we can focus on, or whether we have a much wider remit. Is that right?
Yeah, I think in Appendix 2, it kind of captures some of the observations. And I think one of the observations from some of the people on our table, and I think it echoes across other tables, is around, how do you balance kind of, so it's a 10-year strategy, which on one hand gives you kind of the luxurious position of kind of thinking longer term, but how much do you balance what are our 2 or 3 key priorities, and we should really kind of have a obsession about delivering them versus having it quite very, very kind of broad. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. For us, I think it's about setting that ambition for that 10 years. And I think, if over here on the Isles of Scilly, we think actually the best thing to do in the first 2 or 3 years is to focus on 2 key things and be obsessive about them. That's absolutely perfect and fine. And I think the 10-year strategy allows you then to reflect and to think forward. Okay, then if we delivered what we want to deliver in those 2 or 3 years, what are the next 2 or 3 things we want to focus on? And that's a different approach than saying we've got 10 priorities over 10 years and we're going to pick one every year. So I think having the 10 years gives us the flexibility to kind of really kind of think about what will work best for us. And that's the idea of having it kind of operationalized at a place-based, recognizes that decisions over here might be different to some of the decisions on the mainland, because between now and the publication, we're not going to get into those details around all the specific actions. So it allows us the luxury position to do that, I think, Chair. And if we feel over here picking 1 or 2 or 3 key priorities is the right thing to do, then that's absolutely fine, I think.
I think there's also a need for us to be intelligent in terms of our approach as well. We've got our local authority corporate plan, and I would imagine there's going to be synergy between the two and other documents as we move forward. So it's again just looking at where patterns are emerging. Rachel.
Thanks. I think the other thing as well, for reflect the discussion that was at the Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board workshop, was that this isn't a strategy that should be sort of focusing on health service delivery, because that's been something that there's been a huge amount of focus on over the last few years in terms of transforming and changing. And I think this was really wanting to add to the more well-being agenda, so thinking about what causes and drives health conditions and poor health and inequalities, rather than sort of being thinking that we should be sort of having scrutiny of delivery of certain health service areas, because I think that's sort of a slightly different role. So it's that, what can we all do together to actually focus on some of these sort of more wicked, complex issues, but really get to grips on them, and then quite sort of intelligently track progress to see that something's actually moving in the right direction. So I think that there were some of the discussions and in that focus on well-being as opposed to health services.
I think that's a really interesting comment, thank you. I think we've done, we know what we're looking at, and we've tried over recent past to look at how we can involve the third sector volunteers in issues around loneliness especially, which in a small community like ours actually can be quite a problem. And some of the interesting work on the health aspects of loneliness, which I read one report suggested it was as detrimental to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which I was totally and utterly amazed about. So I think issues here around loneliness and how we social prescribing, and it can twin with initiatives that the council are supporting on encouraging people to exercise more, and it can sort of all twin with absolutely what you say, the wellbeing agenda, rather than, you know, having, as someone said, why is it a health centre up on the hill there? It's a sick centre, but it ought to be, and we would totally applaud the efforts that there are around making it a health and wellbeing centre, as well as just going there when you're ill and starting projects that actively help people to take more responsibility for their own health, which is cost effective, of course. Yeah, so that was really welcome. Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you for that, for those comments. It's really, really reassuring, and you know, we'll talk later at the workshop. But I've often talked about, you know, redressing the balance between the well-being and the health part of the health and well-being strategy, or the health well-being board. And you know, the evidence absolutely points to that. When you talk to people about their well-being, they don't cite their physical health. They actually talk about, you know, having money to be secure. They talk about families and relationships. You talk about, you know, having a purpose in life. They're the three things which come out of the research. And I think it was last week there was a publication around the government around well-being and economy, and again linking the well-being of the population to economic outputs, which again is a slightly different lens to look through. So I think what, you know, our strive in this 10-year strategy is to think about, you know, putting in bold, if you like, the well-being part of it, and not to negate the importance of the health bit of it, but probably to recognise that over the last decade or so, the focus has been on the health part of it rather than the well-being bit. And we know really that, you know, the well-being bit is as equally important, if not more important, for people's happiness and prosperity. So thank you.
And I think just as an observation from me on that sort of subject is, do we always have the right people around this table to pick up on some of those discussions? I'm certainly aware that if we're talking about some of the headlines in the wider determinants box on page 121, there are probably gaps around this table which could be filled. Do people who are invited to the Health and Wellbeing Board not necessarily come because they don't think it's relevant? Perhaps we need to start to try and change those messages to make sure that we have a more holistic audience around the table to work on some of those messages.
I think you're right, Chair, and I think when we finalise the publication of the strategy and there's absolute clarity around some of the priorities for the Isles of Scilly, we might want to reflect on the representation around the board, because obviously in terms of the delivery of that strategy, the board will take the responsibility for that, and I guess you'd want to make sure you've got the right people sat on the table who can seek assurance from and help drive that forward.
Yeah. Rebecca.
Just on Appendix 1 and 10, so that's something called a service implication matrix at the end of the population health needs structure, and that is to try and highlight to those services who perhaps don't necessarily recognise themselves as delivering or being part of that health and well-being agenda, to really highlight where they contribute. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of having that hook to say, you know, here you go, this is where you contribute, this is how you can contribute. I think that's something that can be worked on and developed over time.
Good. Look forward to working on that with you, perhaps. Any other observations or comments on this paper? We have 4 recommendations on page 113 of the document pack. Do I have a proposer and seconder for those en masse?
With the agreed amendments for Appendix 1, then yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. And I look forward to the workshop in about an hour's time. I think it just helps take it to the next level too, doesn't it? I think we're now passing over to Aisling for agenda item 10, which is our Better Care Fund 2017-2019 review.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, 2 papers coming up, one which is looking back and one looking forward. So the Better Care Fund is money that comes from NHS Kerno to the local authority, and we agree priorities jointly with them to support the objectives of the Better Care Fund. So it's slightly different on Scilly because a big focus nationally is around delayed transfers of care, which is bed blocking, as it's known in the media, and we don't actually have a specific issue around that because our local knowledge is such that we are able to support early discharge from hospital back to our own community setting. So we have been allowed certain flexibility to commission schemes that actually address well-being. So one of the things we fund is Buzzer Bus, and which gets people out and participating in their community and get to health appointments. We have a concessionary boat fare scheme, which enables off-island residents to come over to St Mary's. We've commissioned mental health services, which self-evidently, for the first time, we now have an on-island practitioner and is already kind of making huge strides. I think she's got 80 people on her books at the moment at a primary care level. So we've commissioned some really good things that have made a difference to the lives on the Isles of Scilly. So what's required as part of the governance process is to write an annual report, which then goes to the NHS, and that's attached here. So I wanted you to have oversight of it and decide that that's an accurate picture of what we've done, and then also the year-end financial outcome. Now, if you look at it, you might think, oh, it's all things are underspent. That's actually about just literally what was claimed in that year. So, for example, the mental health practitioner role, that's actually given, the money is actually transferred directly from the NHS to CPFT, and CPFT just haven't yet invoiced the NHS. That money is still allocated and secure and can be rolled forward into this year. Where we have found delivery hard is around Disabled Facilities Grant, and we do promote that scheme, but actually the official eligibility criteria is actually quite problematic for the islands. And then when we do have eligible people, it's actually quite hard to commission the works through all sorts of issues around available contractors and so on. We've had some success this year, last year, and now we've got another project in the pipeline. The government is revising guidance on DFG to allow greater flexibility for local authorities, but they haven't done that yet because they're quite busy. So I'm going to try and track down colleagues at the Department of Health and get some kind of exception for the Isles of Scilly, because it's just daft having this capital money, which I know could improve people's living conditions, but don't necessarily meet the criteria of Better Care Funds. It has to be a minimum spend of £5,000. That's actually quite significant. I think there are much smaller things that would make a difference to people's lives, which cost about 50 quid. And it could be actually something that we could dovetail with the scheme that we commissioned through Anthony. So it's not for want of trying around the DFG. My colleague Bob Dawson made a good point that actually maybe the title itself is a bit depressing. So maybe we could think about rebranding it, because Disabled Facilities Grant does sound quite kind of isolating. So maybe we could think about how we might repackage it. But I can't make any promises about what the DOH would be happy for us to do. Otherwise, Better Care Fund overall, we've de-risked it. NHS are very, very happy with the governance around it. So I think it's been a bit of a success story. It's also been very, very useful to the local authority, because it has enabled us to fund some schemes that I don't think we would have been affordable given local government finances. So it has ensured that the continuation of things like Buzzer Bus and concessionary boat fares. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Councillor Marcus, you'd like to...
Oh, yeah, sorry. So just to clarify, the underspends in the table, they are all partly due to people not invoicing in time for this report?
Yeah, some schemes came in under value. It's so prescribed and we couldn't get off the ground. So at the November meeting, it was agreed that any underspends that happened could all go to the mental health service. So that's agreed. And then the mental health service itself has been underclaiming, but that's a kind of CPFT issue.
And those funds can be rolled over to next year?
Yes, they're secure. So
Okay.
therefore, when we look at the next paper, I'm asking for a certain allocation to mental health services because we've got all that underspend.
Mhm.
So actually, we've got less spending this year than we would have thought.
And the other thing I was going to ask on page 144 was about the accessory boat fare. There's just some numbers missing there.
Yeah, sorry. At the time of writing the report, I didn't have all my sums, but I can tell you them now. Sorry, let me just open the computer. We had 92 users and 3,725 tickets, 28 for health specials.
Right.
So that's slightly changed now because obviously the funding for off-island travel to health appointments is different. So we only pay now for the ones where people have appointments on Scilly itself.
Okay.
But it's a great scheme, and one of the things we're talking to Health Watch about is putting some questions around these commissioned services into their questionnaire in the autumn, and to find out what difference it has made to people's lives. We know anecdotally that particularly Buzzer Bus is kind of life-changing and a lifeline to people. It's a fabulous service.
Okay. I was just going to ask about, just for my clarity, on page 138, you've got the 4 national metrics.
Yes.
Are they relevant to the Arts of Scilly, or?
They are the metrics, but if you look at there's a paragraph on page 3 which says not all of the 4 national metrics pertain to the environmental issues experienced by the island community.
Yeah.
So we have got flexibility. I have put in the reablement figure later on when I talk about reablement, so we do that. But the other bits of data, either it's not relevant or we would be such hostages to fortune, because I cannot guarantee that all these services reduce admissions to residential care, when in 1 year you'll have 9, in 1 year 8, and the fact whether or not we have Buzzer Bus in place is not going to be the point. We just don't have a big enough sample of people to commit ourselves to saying we will have 7 people next year. It just won't work that way, you know.
The only observation I was going to make was I'm greatly encouraged by the sort of numbers you're talking about accessing the mental health day services. It's a new service. It's culturally new to Scilly. It's something we knew was required, but I'm very pleased that the community are making the most of that professional support.
Yes, and there's been quite a lot of interest in the project from NHS England and also the media. So I think there's going to be a piece on Spotlight, because it is a kind of first and really innovative way of delivering mental health services. It's this kind of one-stop shop straddling primary and secondary care. So again, we'll need to have a conversation, I think, at next Health and Wellbeing Board about what's the exit strategy for this post, which hopefully you'll approve funding till 2020, but what happens next, because actually it's making such a difference in terms of addressing social isolation and minimising people's need to travel to the mainland, which is not ideal, particularly if you've got a mental health issue.
Any other comments? We have a recommendation on the front page of the report. I think we've picked up on those. Do we have a proposer and seconder to accept that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Francis. Thank you, Councillor Marcus. So that was last year. Are we now moving on to this year?
This year. Okay, so some of the schemes that are listed actually were approved by email, as agreed by the chairman of the board, because obviously there were posts attached to some of those schemes, and we wanted to ensure that those services remain sustainable. So you've already approved access to services, which is Buzzer Bus and concessionary boat fares. You've already approved mental health services. So that is now funded till December 2020, which is really good. And then you've also approved the Rapid Response Early Intervention Service, which is the physio based at the health centre. The allocation is reduced this year to reflect the fact that, like, the actual need for the service and part-time hours. So what I'm now suggesting is new, is a slight increase on our reablement allocation. It was 37,000 last year. I'm suggesting it is up to 45. We've been able to provide new services, and really delighted that we've been able to, for the first time, commission intermediate care and provide that at Park House. And it has been successful. I can't really talk about numbers because it will be identifiable, but the individuals who are offered those 6-week placements to support discharge from hospital did successfully return to independent life at home and really enjoyed their experience. So it's a really good service. So if we can increase that allocation, that enables me to commission 1 more intermediate care bed. And then there's a proposal around healthy ageing. So this is Rachel Wigglesworth's baby, actually. It's about taking what you commissioned in Cornwall, the Move More project, and doing a kind of silly version of that, and taking it from the bit my age, where you should be thinking about being healthier, all the way to living in Park House, and how do we maximise physical participation, because actually physical participation addresses so many of the wellbeing issues we talked about earlier, which is, you know, a sense of purpose, meeting people. So we are working with Helen Tite, who runs a company called I Care, I Move, doing some really innovative stuff, both in care homes, using technology, and out in the community. So there was meant to be a brilliant workshop last week where I had our local physio, our leisure services, hospital staff, care workers, all getting together to design what does that look like for the Isles of Scilly. And of course it was foggy, so it's really annoying. So that's now being postponed till July. So I will send a detailed specification round to all of you, and I think I'm going to ask the chairman if the recommendation could be that you approve it by email rather than wait to the autumn and then, you know, so we can just get going. I've given indicative costs. There's also potential for funding from the locality. So I'm going to explore that as well, and maybe also Duchy Charity. So I will let you know the definite allocation as we get there. There's also some room, even if we fund that, also some room maybe to give some seed funding to a project called The Haven, which is a community-led idea around the fact that one of the biggest barriers to successful recovery is if you get stuck on the mainland, or you need to be at the hospital for a long time. So the community have got together to purchase a property where people will have affordable accommodation. It's a fantastic idea, and people are doing it in their own spare time. So I said, I think it would be good. I think it's an absolutely appropriate use of money to support that. They are at the moment pursuing charitable status, so I thought I'd let them get on with that. But maybe then, if you were interested in this idea, I could arrange a meeting with the trustees and say, we are interested in giving you some seed funding. What could we put that towards? Is it feasibility at this stage or whatever? But I think it's really good that the community is taking this on themselves, but I think it's good that the statutory agencies recognise that too. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ashley. I just wanted to endorse your comments about the Disabled Facilities Grant and agree that the title isn't the most stimulating sometimes, is it? And if the sort of volume of grant spend could be reduced, then it seems like a great way forward. The Move More project sounds very exciting. I'm really pleased to hear that sometimes potentially ties in with our leisure team as well. It seems to be similar to what's going on with children and families at the moment, but at the other end of the spectrum. So that seems very good. And the Haven feasibility, we're talking about a relatively small amount of money, are we?
Really small. Yeah, it's small, but it would be significant to see the fundraisers, I think.
And potentially that could be something which email exchanges could just influence and shape what that's used.
Yeah, we just need to make sure the Haven's got proper governance around it. So once they've got the charity status, in terms of like we give money for the community grants, we just need to make sure that we probably follow that same route.
Properly constituted, bank account, etc. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when do you think healthy ageing, that project, when do you think that's gonna take off?
We've got the workshop in July. And so therefore, you know, I would like to start something in September, October. That's usually a good time of year to start anything on Scilly, you know, just after summer's finished, and then focus. That's what I'd like to do.
Councillor Grottick.
Yes, I ought to declare an interest because I've got a family member who's actively involved is actually a trustee of the Haven project. But just to give you an update, that the Trelisk property manager and the Trelisk leads have been very helpful to the project and did identify an old gatehouse that might have been suitable, but it's actually been not subject to a full survey, but it's quickly become apparent that the costs of actually refurbishing this building were actually too onerous. So they have now offered a site which just has a garage on it, quite adjacent to that, which is a flat site. And the thinking is that a modular build on that would be more cost effective. So at the moment, it doesn't seem to be moving forward very fast because the public side of it hasn't been possible to have another meeting, but in the meanwhile there's an awful lot of work going on in the background, and support from this committee, where I would obviously have to declare an interest, would be hugely beneficial.
Paul.
Chair, could I just return to the issue about rehab and intermediate care and use of Park House and the general approach of health and social care with regard to this area, these subjects. I think it's credit where credit is due. That it's been something that I've worked in for many years gone by, and I see the problems now, certainly on the mainland. And I just think it's very positive to hear that rehabilitation is a word that's used on a regular basis and it's taking place. Whereas I know over many years it's struggled, and I just think it's so encouraging, particularly for older people who are being given another chance rather than being dealt with and disposed of. So I think that's really encouraging, and I have heard some whispers from people concerning those services that are really quite good. So jolly well good. Jolly well done.
Jolly good. In danger of just going on to a slightly negative note, paragraph 6 talks about exit strategies. Do we, in terms of risk, is it something we're expecting, or is it just we want to do an exit strategy because?
Well, the guidance is that we probably do need to in the autumn work out what we're going to do if there is no equivalent to Better Care Fund next year. My view is that there will be an equivalent next year because there just has been for so long now. I just don't know who knows exactly. So, I mean, to be honest, in terms of an exit strategy for this local authority, those schemes would just not be affordable within the local authority financial envelope. Or members agree that they are so important that something else won't happen. So it will definitely have a negative impact if we don't have this joint funding.
Yes, so long as members are aware of that and we can make those budgetary decisions well in advance. Unfortunately, the timing doesn't work, does it? If it's December.
Well, I mean, it's been one of the tricky things about the Better Care Fund is that the timings just do not help at all with planning, because actually the actual allocations have not actually been published. We are working on best advice at the moment. So it doesn't fit with our budget setting process, because if we're starting that in the autumn and we're not definitely going to know whether there's Better Care Fund or not. So it's for me to turn my hair out a bit and just ask NHS colleagues what they're doing.
Well, I'm glad you're tearing your hair out, not me.
Rachel.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say I look forward to working with Aisling on the healthy ageing programme and sort of bringing in some learning from what we've done on the mainland. But also in reference to social prescribing, and I haven't had the conversations about what the issues were about that, and obviously you have alternatives here, but the new NHS long-term plan has announced funding for social prescribing link workers that are being sort of established in Cornwall, and you would obviously be linked with West Pen With as a sort of primary care network. So I would just sort of welcome a discussion really about how that might work for you in terms of having some proportion of the support, if that's what would work, or something different.
So we're working. So on the social prescribing things, we basically wanted to keep it really simple, just want a befriending project. So I'm talking to Macmillan a lot at the moment, who've really got going on the islands in helping set up a support group and so on, about maybe Macmillan and other voluntary sector organisations all coming together with a proposal on a befriending social prescribing idea, because there aren't enough people with cancer or MS or whatever, so if they could kind of bring it all together and then maybe we jointly fund it. But linking into what's already available in Helston practice. Yeah, I've got to put that on the list. Thanks, Rachel. Not meant to come here and give me work.
So we'll look forward to hearing more about moving more in July, weather permitting.
Yeah, and is it okay if I email?
And we might just need to tinker with the recommendation in that case too. So we're approving proposed schemes, but leaving room to have email conversations regarding the Haven and the Move More project.
I'll propose that.
Are you willing to second that, Councillor Grossick? I'm just bearing in mind your declaration of interest. Am I? Yes, Paul's done. Fine, that's good. So the Haven is totally clean from that. Thank you very much. Item 12, Paul, is your Health Watch strategy for the coming year.
In your past, very simple KPI what we're looking to, and also the document concerning strategy for this coming year. So it'd be nice and straight. That is simple. I understand that the fees the way with we like to keep the line questions and issues rise. We haven't really had them before, or we haven't but we will be building on and we'll be trying to keep we'll be judged by where necessary. So if there's any
Paul, can I just ask that you turn your mic on?
Could you put your microphone on, please?
That's all right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry. Is that okay with people? I mean, I've got to give a report as well on an update on where we are at the present moment. So if people are happy with those two documents, then
Any comments or questions you'd like to push in Paul's direction?
suits me.
Jolly good.
Right. If you'll excuse me, Chair, I'll be reading from a script. Health and Watch Isles of Scilly. You may well be aware that we've over the recent 12 months we've had some change of staff, and there have been times when we haven't been 100% in our staffing, and also we've changed things from having a manager and a project worker to having two equal coordinators who reflect each other's work, helping us to be more flexible in our response than we were previously. So now things are settling down, but I'll later tell you why they're going to be a little bit more unsettled. But things have settled down over a recent period of time. And I think what we've been able to start to do at some speed and with some energy is to begin our engagement with the off-islands. There are two reasons for this. One is because we used to do it on a regular basis anyway, that when we were reduced in staff numbers, something had to go, and that was something that was put to one side. The second reason is that you may be aware that the NHS have approached Health Watch England nationally to ask health watches throughout England to engage with communities with regard to the NHS 10-year plan and to gather feedback, ideas, how services are used, how services may be provided in the future, etc. All health watches have been tasked with this, and it has been funded. There have been small amounts of funding to help local health watches achieve this. We are working in partnership with Cornwall, which is important because we've always had a relationship with them, but now it's increasing and improving in our contact and our strategies of working together, and it's to our mutual benefit. We've gained some valuable insights. So there have been two reasons why we've been visiting. One is because we're re-engaging with the communities, and secondly because of the NHS 10-year plan. We've gained valuable insight into the current lived experiences on the off-islands with regard to health and social care. We're in the process of arranging meetings with the relevant providers to discuss this feedback where difficulties have been identified. We have identified one or two. I won't refer to any in any great detail because it is our custom practice of working that when issues come to us, we discuss with the providers first so we can actually get a balanced response or achieve a balanced outcome of the information that comes our way. But it's fair enough that to say, I suppose, that medical transport issues is one of the issues that was raised quite frequently with us in our engagement with the off-islands. So we aim to continue to have our drop-in sessions on the off islands, encouraging the public engagement with the health and social care service beyond the island of St Mary's. The outreach regarding the NHS long-term plan survey gave us some mixed results. It's a little difficult to talk to people about something which is still in sort of abstract. You can't see it as such, you can't feel it. And also there are other issues around, and I won't mention the word, but I think there are other things on people's minds at the present moment. But that we still have sufficient response to work with Cornwall and produce a response for the NHS and for the government with regard to the NHS 10-year plan, which we'll be working with Cornwall over the next couple of months to achieve that. We've produced a strategy document and a KPI document, as you are aware. We're also fostering closer relations with Healthwatch Cornwall, which I've mentioned has been very positive. One thing that we have done in our engagement is we've not only spoken to individuals or invited individuals to talk with us, but we've actually approached some community groups as well and gained some views there concerning health and social care services. One of the things we've also done, and it's something of an appreciation of the service which is often criticised, is that one of our coordinators, at the same time as attending a meeting on the mainland, took the opportunity to visit, I think it's based at Treliske Hospital, the transport section. You may be aware that we chair the medical transport, I have to write it down, medical travel transport group on the islands, which meets about every 2 months or 3 months. And that's a collection of people from health, social care, steamship company, and people from Treliske Hospital in particular, who talk about the issues that are raised by people concerning their travel to and from, or accessing medical services in the main, although no doubt other services come into focus from time to time. And it sorts out the problems. In the main, some are more difficult than others. But one of the things that we do take on board is that people's frustration sometimes, it's trying to access a service, organising their visits to the mainland usually via air, and it's not always straightforward. And there's been some criticism sometimes of the travel section at Treliske. What we do recognise even more now is the culmination of the visit was that this is a group of people who are really overtasked in the expectations of them, because they are responsible for the great majority of transport throughout Cornwall, let alone the trip from Isles of Scilly to Cornwall and return. So we do, and if it's recorded, that we do appreciate the work and the effort that is put into trying to meet the needs of the community of the islands with regard to transport to and from the mainland. It's recognised that that the services that they are doing their best under difficult, most probably very trying circumstances. So we are where we are at the present moment. I did mention that things with regard to staffing were had settled. They're becoming unsettled because one of our coordinators has been offered a post with the local authority. And they will be leaving us in the near future. So we will have, again, a vacancy, but we'll do our utmost to be responsive to the expectations of the work that we undertake. So if there are any questions, please ask them now.
Any questions? Thank you very much for that.
Just to if I may, an annual report will be produced shortly, which will be made available to you all. hopefully that will be within 3 or 4 weeks. We have to provide that for Health Watch England anyway, but it's been our habit to circulate it around the islands. And also it's come September time, October, it's time for the annual survey, which I think Aisling referred to. We will be meeting with services who are normally referred to in the survey to see if there's any tweaks or additional comments or questions that can be put to the community. We will not wish to change the survey too much because this is about our 3rd or 4th one. It's because it enables us to reflect changes over time or achievements of that period of time. But we will try and make it as relevant to the community and to the services that work here as much as we can. So that will be around about September, October, that exercise will take place. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our final agenda item is item 13, our Health and Wellbeing Board Forward Plan.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The very short covering report for this is it's intended to be the board's document to own, and it's a theme being repeated today by board members that this is much more than a discussion forum. This kind of actively involved in developing live documents and addressing live issues, much like the medical travel and transport group that Paul's referred to. And one or two things I've already notes I've taken in relation to this around the meeting, and from today is one is about how we get the right people in the room that recognise their individual or organisation's value to contribute to improvements on the Isles of Scilly. Another is the kind of aspect around building in correspondence out of kind of formal board meeting time to approve, say, better care fund things. And lastly, the meeting dates as raised by Councillor Marcus, and that these are done in a timely fashion so that the right people can be in the room and make arrangements for that. So, yeah, essentially the forward plan is there. It's aligning kind of hopefully aligning the kind of needs of organisations with the actions that are being kind of promoted through kind of discussion and partnership. So any comments on the content of the plan? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Do partners have any comments or queries? I find it a useful aid memoir sometimes just to maintain focus, but I don't know if any others have got comments on the content. And I guess in the spirit of emails, if anyone had a thought outside the meeting, that'd be totally acceptable to email it into us. So as a board, I think the recommendation is that we approve the forward plan subject to any agreed changes. It sounds like you've made a few notes in today's conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Grosick. Well, thank you all for your time this morning. I think it's been very useful. There's been some good initiatives which I hope will come to fruition in the short to medium term. Thanks to all those who've helped pull the agenda together and submit reports. I look forward to the workshop in half an hour or so's time. Thank you very much.